I am Rachel Humphrey with It's Personal Stories, a hospitality podcast, and we are dedicated to empowering personal success in the hospitality industry. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Allison Handy, the Chief Commercial Officer at Aimbridge. Allison, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm honored to be here.
Allison, one of the fun things today for me is that normally when I'm interviewing guests, I'm interviewing people that I know. And today we have only met through this process. And so I get to learn all about you at the same time that all of our listeners are getting to learn all about you. And that's really fun for me. So if we kick off, tell us a little bit about your journey to leadership. One of the things I love in the industry is how unique everyone's path can be and really tailored to themselves. So talk a little bit about where you've come from, how you got to where you are today, and maybe if there are any pivotal moments along the way that you think have really contributed to that path for you.
Sure. I always think it's interesting with leadership and hospitality that very few actually set out to be in hospitality and they've landed here some other way and never left. But I think for me, it goes back to a family culture of longevity and work ethic being honored. And I think about my dad worked at only 2 law firms in his career. My grandfather started a business and my uncles worked there their entire careers. My brother's been at a company for 20 years. And so when I think about how I was raised, of what type of work I would get into, I always knew that there was a value behind doing the hard work and being in a place for a long time. And so I never intended to be in the hotel business. I interned after college. I went to USC and I interned with a friend's mother in the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Newport Beach, which introduced me to the industry. Prior to that, I thought maybe I'd go into finance or consulting or marketing. I was an entrepreneurial studies major at USC, so it gave me exposure to a wide variety of attributes of business, but I had not yet settled on one. So after graduating, I started on the interview process of deciding I think I'm going to want to work in a hotel. And I grabbed the yellow pages and I went hotel by hotel I was in Newport Beach, California at the time. And I got a director of sales to answer the phone in one of the hotels that I called. And that started my career as a sales admin at the Hilton Irvine Orange County Airport. And that was managed by Interstate. So I started my career with Interstate. I was there all the way until I left to work for Prism. And then ironically, Interstate was bought by Aimbridge and Prism was bought by Aimbridge. And so I've come completely full circle and can say that while I've worked for 3 different company names, they all actually are the same company in the end. So I followed in my family footsteps of kind of longevity with tenure and career. So I've been 27 years or so. I never changed that 27 years, by the way. I don't get any older. It's just always 27 years. But in really being from Interstate to Prism to Aimbridge, and Prism, I was lucky enough to be a partner with some wonderful business partners led by Steve Van, and we were acquired by Aimbridge. And I don't know that I thought that I would stay at Aimbridge, to be quite honest, even though it was an excellent opportunity for us to be acquired by them. They were always a competitor of ours for many years. But after working there and integrating into the organization and seeing how much opportunity there was for me there, this is my home. And so I'm still on my same company, I guess you would say, 27 years later.
Definitely some great themes in there that I want to follow up on. I too was raised in a house of longevity. My dad was a tenured professor at the same university for over 50 years. And that was the only way that I knew coming out of school. And I love the yellow pages reference. I feel like it's when I refer to the Rolodex and everyone's you're aging yourself, that going down the yellow pages looking for a job is something I think a lot of listeners will definitely relate to.
I was cold calling before I knew I was even in sales.
Yeah, maybe that's what gave the director of sales the inkling that you were the one to go with. Yeah. I do want to start off our conversation today actually talking about something that's really important to me and very important to you as well. I had shared with you that when I'm talking to students, it breaks my heart a little bit when I hear them ask me, do I have to choose between being a mom and having whatever an advancing career will look like. And you've been very vocal about the importance to you of both and the ability to do both successfully, whatever that successfully means. Can you share a little bit about your story, about maybe the progression or evolution of that for you? And then what would you tell people that are listening that are thinking, can I do both? I can't do both. And that from that standpoint.
I would love to, because I am very passionate about this topic. And I think as I was coming up, it was always women in hospitality. And I'm trying to reframe that too as mothers in hospitality and not just women in hospitality. But it's interesting. I was one of those young girls. And I remember vividly telling my vice president of sales at the time when I was a director of sales that I never want his job because I want to be a mom. And I didn't see how the two could correlate. How could I be a vice president of sales traveling and then also be the kind of mom I wanted to be? And I find the irony in that of now I'm a mom of 3 kids and I think I've taken 80 flights this year. So I am proving that you can do both. And I love this conversation. And I love this conversation with women and young men. The culture is changing now to where there is so much more balance at home. And so it's a similar culture for young men now too. But there are some things that need to happen. You have to have a supportive partner at home. And I'm fortunate that I have always had a husband who champions my career and enjoys leaning in further than the traditional role models of dads and fathers and dual working families. So that has enabled me to have a career that thrives. And so the first question I always ask is, do you have someone who will support you at home? Because that is so important in order to make this journey successful. But I also want to be clear that women who seek balance will always feel like they are failing. And if you feel like you are seeking balance between motherhood and workhood and career, you're never going to feel like you're giving enough. And so I reframe the conversation to say, are you present and contributing in a meaningful way in whichever role you're in at the moment? And so it's not about the amount of time you are giving to each role. It's the amount of presence and engagement you are giving to each role. So I may not have as much time with my children that women who work from home or work at home or in the home have, but the time that I do have is always going to be intentional and quality. I max out my vacation every year because that is time with my family that is intentional and engaged. So the conversation with young women is to say, I was there, I felt what you feel of how will this ever happen? And I want to support them in every way I can to show them firsthand that you can do both. And I've got daughters at home who also champion me. And yes, are they bummed sometimes that I miss a soccer game or aren't there to help them study for a finals? But they also know that I'm doing something great as a role model for them too. So there is a lot of pride for me in being able to represent the ability to do both.
I love that. And I love the intentionality of it, where you set up not just with a great support system and with the expectations of your family, but where you say, I know that this is important to me. I can make it work, but I have to be very intentional in how I show up at each. And just by sharing that, I know that will inspire a lot of people that may be wondering whether or not that is a possibility for them as well. I might know what you're going to say on this one, but I want to talk about realizing leadership for a minute. And you may have just hinted at it a second ago, but oftentimes I'm surprised during these interviews where some people say, I was born to be a leader. I knew out of the womb, or I knew in Pee-wee football or whatever that I was going to be a leader. And I have others who say, wait, you think I'm a leader today? Like they have a little bit of how they identify. Can you talk a little bit about, was there a point for you where you either set out or knew that you would have a leadership role within the industry, or is that something still that you are processing through today?
I value my role as a leader. I always have. And the mark of a leader is how they develop their teams and how people feel working under them. And my goal from day one, whether in title or in practice, was to make sure that those around me felt supported and felt that they were learning and they were growing and they were developing. And so it was organic. It wasn't, I want to be the director of sales because I want to be the leader. It was, I just gradually started helping people and helping to develop people. And it's interesting because I would say that I grew up also in an environment where my dad would never give us the answers. We had to find the answers and we had to learn the answers. And so it also created this idea of wanting to continue to learn and grow myself. And so when you're in a room and you're asking questions and you're asking people about themselves and you're asking about their job history and you're asking about what they've done and you're learning, you're also learning to be a leader at the same time, because you are in practice becoming a leader in the moment by just gravitating towards how you can help people in their careers as well.
Allison, you made a great point at the start of that, which is it isn't about the title. A title doesn't make you a leader. It's how you show up and evolve that does. So I think that's a great lesson for everybody. I did want to talk about when you were telling your journey, and you've got the interstate piece and the prison piece and the Aimbridge piece. And I think in hospitality, that's actually a situation with the consolidation, mergers and acquisitions that we see more and more, especially over maybe the last decade or so, and something that can cause a lot of stress or unknown, but also opportunity for people who are sitting at companies that are on one side or the other, not knowing what's going to happen when that consolidation happens. Can you talk a little bit? Did you implement any specific strategies for managing any of those transitions? Did you have to lean into certain leadership skills you knew you had in the ability to really pivot from one style of company, one style of leadership, the actual people involved? What have those processes been like for you?
Oh, Rachel, you have no idea the change that it was for me. And it definitely was the greatest test of my leadership for sure, and my own personal skills and values. And you nailed it. I came from a company that was very small and very family oriented feeling. And as partners, we sat at the table with every owner constantly, and we were very personally engaged with them. And then to come to the largest organization in the world was a little bit of a shock to my system. But I did what I've always done, and I look for opportunity to add value. Where do I see opportunity that I can bring to the table and help this company or this team evolve? Whether I was going to be there a week or whether I was going to be there 10 years or whatever my duration of time was going to be at this organization, it was, where can I add value? And the ability to come in with fresh perspective to an organization like Aimbridge and look for areas of opportunity. And I think early on, I've always been known of not being afraid to be vocal. It's definitely a strength and a weakness, but I early on found opportunity and went to the people who could make a difference and said, I think that we have an opportunity here, or I think we could do this differently. And so gradually I just became more and more invested in the organization and celebrating the differences between what I had and what it was, and how I can bring a little bit of what we had to this new company. And then they invested equally in me. And my journey with Aimbridge has been incredibly rewarding, coming from a small company and making that transition to a large organization and continuing to provide value to that organization. But I say a lot, and anyone on my team has probably heard me say this a number of times, do the job before you get the job. Yeah. And the more that you are adding value and you are contributing in a meaningful way and you are volunteering to do work outside of the scope of your own job, is how you get the job. And in my entire career, it was never, I want to be the vice president, I want to be the senior vice president. It was, I just started doing the work. I just started putting myself at the table, putting myself in the room, working on projects that were outside of my scope. And so that created value to Aimbridge and helped them see value in me and allowed me to continue to grow within the company. But yes, it was a really growing opportunity for me, having been, 15 years with Prism. Shock to the system to come somewhere new, but what a great blessing it's been.
I had a similar experience with doing the work before having the job. When I became COO, it was because I had dug into everything, trying to be successful in a new role. And then I ended up knowing how all the pieces fit together when they were looking for that opportunity. So I think that's really great. I have a follow-up question though. You said you're known for being vocal, and being vocal in a new environment can take a lot of confidence and other things. So is that something that the ability to be vocal, does that come from a confidence from within that you know that you have value to add to a conversation? Because showing up like that can be really scary or really difficult for some people.
Yeah, it can. And there are moments too where I just had one recently with Craig, our CEO, where I came in after the fact and it said, maybe I was a little too vocal in that conversation. So let's rewind the tape a little bit. And he chuckled, and he values that in me. But early on, I keep going back to my childhood, but we debated at the dinner table. We debated as a family, and we were encouraged to share our opinion. And my dad wanted, my mom, they wanted to know what we had to say, and they wanted us to have conviction and have opinions. And so that is innate in me, from roles that I had in my sorority in college, from roles that I had early in my career. I always wanted to contribute. I always wanted to make sure that I was, as I said earlier, adding value. And I guess that confidence comes from a place of, I know I am bringing value, and it may not always be right. It may not always be the direction that is appropriate to go, but I always want to make sure that if I'm there, if I have a seat at the table, I'm making use of that seat at the table and providing value. And it doesn't matter whether that seat at the table was as a sales manager at a hotel, whether it was in a revenue meeting, but if you're at the table, you've got something to share, or you wouldn't be there.
That's, I think, such the critical point, is there's a reason that you're sitting there. And I like the point too of, they may not always follow that, or you might not be right in it, but the ability to vocalize and express that is really important. You mentioned a minute ago that being vocal is both a strength and a weakness. And as we evolve our leadership, there are some things that get stronger, that we get better at due to usually an intentional focus on developing it. And then there's some things that over time we're like, oh, may not be quite as good at that as I used to. Can you think of an example, or one or both of those, of maybe something in your leadership that's gotten better and something that maybe is slipping a little bit?
Yeah, I think as I've grown in my career, I'm able to see the bigger picture. And I think as you rise into an organization and you're exposed to more parts of the organization and the industry and how the pieces all fit together, you realize that maybe that problem that feels insurmountable at the moment, when looking at it in the bigger picture across the entire organization, you realize that there is a light at the end of the other side, and that you don't need to fixate so much on each individual problem. But there is also the piece of that where I need to help make sure that my team sees that whatever the problem of the moment is at that moment, they haven't yet maybe had the exposure to the company in a greater capacity as I have. And so trying to teach them and help them see the bigger picture on what seems like a challenge of the moment. So I definitely think that is a growth mindset, though, that comes with growth. What am I getting worse at? I think you probably ask my husband, I'd say patience. I think that, I don't know if that's just age, if that's career, if that's taking 80 flights a year and being constantly in travel. I think that I just don't have as much patience for maybe people who aren't as respectful in the workplace. And I think that we are exposed to so many walks of life, from investors and owners and brands and our own teams and colleagues and clients. And it's really been interesting over the last 20 years to see all the different approaches that people have to their business relationships. And I think that I have become more protective of my team as I've grown, to really want to surround myself and our teams with people who do business the same way that we do business, and treat people with respect, because we all have a job to do and nobody sets out to not do a good job. And maybe people are better at some things than others, but working collaboratively is going to get you the greatest level of success. And so I think that level of patience, not just in the little things like the person that cuts in line at the airport or tries to put 3 bags in the overhead bin, there's that level of patience, but then there's also the level of patience in a meeting room and in the boardroom and whatever the place is where there's unproductive and unconstructive conversation that is occurring, and how I can redirect that energy to a place of positivity.
I like the correlation too. I don't know if I've ever thought about this, between patience and respect, though, in making sure in those environments that it's being done in the right way. You mentioned a second ago a growth mindset, and certainly something very common among leaders in any industry, certainly in hospitality. But as each of us either accepts a new role or seeks out a new role, we come across something that we realize is going to be really important for success in that role that maybe we don't have any experience with in the past or we haven't learned along the way. Can you think of an example of a skill, and it can be a technical skill or a leadership skill that you encountered and you said, you know what, this is something I'm going to need on my own to set out and to develop? And how did you go about doing that?
I think I said earlier that I grew up in an environment where we didn't get the answers. We had to learn the answers. And so it's a common theme in your podcast across all the people that you talk to is all these leaders have the desire to learn. And I am no different. I want to read. I want to learn. I want to ask questions. And so when I found myself first starting to pitch deals to bring in new hotels to Prism, and there were conversations going on at the table that I had no idea what it meant. I didn't know what a cap rate was. I didn't know what an IRR was. I didn't know what any of these phrases meant. And I didn't want to just sit there and smile and act like I did. And so we walked out of the first meeting and I looked at my partner and I said, all right, we are going to have some time together and you are going to educate me on what I need to know to feel that I can contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way. And between what Kevin taught me, between what I learned on my own, and I remember Googling, what is an IRR, and just trying to learn it. But that's a microcosm of one moment in time that I really needed to learn something. The whole journey of my career and so many leaders' career is about seeking knowledge. And I'm desperately trying to instill that in my kids and how you learn and how you read and how you ask questions of people and of things that are of interest that you don't know anything about is where you grow in your career and in life, quite frankly. Like I go back to my days as a non-corporate sales manager at my very first sales job. And it was the only job where in the same day I could meet with a rabbi, a soccer coach, and a candle collector. And and that would be like my day. My 3 meetings of that day were trying to book these 3 groups and just sitting with all 3 of them and asking questions and understanding what motivates them and what their values are. And at the time it was to try and figure out how to book them and sell them into my hotel. But what I didn't realize in the moment is how much I was just growing as a person and talking to all these different walks of life. Craig, our CEO, is the exact same way. And my one-on-one with him recently, he gave me 3 books to read and said, these are my favorites right now. These are going to help you. And I'm the same way. I just met with a colleague and said, this is the book I think you should read. And
I love that.
So that's a common theme when I listen to many of these interviews is that growth mindset.
Absolutely. Right now in the world, there is such a focus on cultural competency, and hospitality. It's certainly critical. You were talking about your experiences at USC, but I also know you did a semester at sea, and I had several friends in college who did that as well. I'm wondering if today, as you sit here in really a global industry, if there are lessons you learned during that semester of international travels that really still impact the way that you lead today or the way that you inform your team on the importance of cultural competency?
I think that I would break it down into 3 buckets. The first bucket would be that I learned to love to learn. And that kind of goes back to the previous conversation of had this opportunity that was given to me by my parents to travel around the world to learn about other cultures. And that was such a gift. And I took every moment of it and I learned everything that I possibly could. It might not have been in the classroom and how to do algebra, but I was in the real world learning and understanding different cultures and how they respect. I took an art class and I took oceanography and the classes that we had in that opportunity. So that would be the first bucket. The second bucket would be, it was confidence building. And it showed me that I'm capable of traveling the world. I am capable of being put in situations that are uncomfortable. Many of the places we go to are not as developed countries. And I could do that. This was before cell phones. We didn't have cell phones. We weren't on Google. We were just showing up in a country and figuring out how to make the most of our opportunity there. And so I think that created a level of confidence that you brought up earlier, that my parents trusted me enough to be able to put me in this situation and this opportunity. And then the third is, I think that I always felt like I could contribute to adult conversations at a younger age because of the life lessons I had and the global exposure that I had. And I was a very young leader, and I tried very hard to cover up how young I was for quite some time. And I tried very hard to act older than I was. I went by the name Allison instead of Allie, which had been my name forever because I felt like Allie sounded too young. And so I became Allison again. And all these things that I did to appear older, I think that experience gave me the opportunity to have adult conversations at a younger age because of that life experience that I had.
That's incredible. I love the confidence building too, and the talking to adults, which I talk to about with my children all the time in the cell phone era, in the video game era, and the ability to actually have a conversation. So I really appreciate your sharing that. Allison, I told you we were going to run short on time. I know that we are, but I definitely want to talk for a minute about mentors. You have talked about how legacy is important to you, that you've had a lot of people who've been great allies and champions for you, and you want to make sure that you are also paying it forward to others through HSMAI and a part with the Rising Stars. Talk a little bit, if you can, about how those allies and champions have really shaped your career and what that looks like as you pay it forward.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take that in two different directions in the short amount of time we have left. The first is going to be about my mentors and my champions. And I've had them in many different ways. Some have championed my career, partners that I worked with that saw opportunity in me to continue to grow my career. It is people who I can reach out to and pick up the phone and call and say, I'm stuck here in this moment. What do you think I should do? And I know they will give me great advice and not just say what they think I want to hear, but truly make me think. And there are people who probably don't even know that they're mentors or leaders of mine who I've watched in my early career and said, I want to be like that. So the mentors run a whole different gamut. But I also want to touch on this Rising Sales Leader program that we developed for HSMAI. And my time with HSMAI was pivotal in my growth in my career because I was at a small company. I didn't have a ton of exposure and opportunity. I didn't have a big team of peers that I could bounce ideas off of. So I could go to HSMAI and sit through a room of my peers and have real dialogue about the industry and where we were going. But what was missing was we were sitting in this room and most of us were all VPs and above. And we were talking about what we felt the younger generation wanted and needed to come into this industry. And we were spitballing all these different ideas. They want this and they value this. And I finally said, why can't we ask them? Like, why are we a bunch of leaders sitting in a room guessing and speculating about what they want? And so the Rising Sales Leaders was both selfless and selfish. It was selfish from the standpoint we needed to gain insight from them, reverse mentoring. We needed insight and information that they could bring to the table. But also we were giving them tremendous exposure and giving them career opportunity to have all of these senior leaders be partners with them in their growth in their career. But it still bothers me, Rachel, when I'm sitting in a boardroom and there's a bunch of baby boomers and Gen Xers talking about what programs we're going to put in place in order to capture the Gen Zs into the industry, or what do they value in an incentive plan, or what do they value in what does the field need, but we don't ask anybody in the field. And so you will frequently hear me say, why are we guessing and speculating what we think these people want or need instead of just bringing them in a room and asking them and letting them shape the direction of this? So that was the Rising Sales Leader and kind of the impetus to where that started. And now HSMAI has taken it and put it on steroids, and it's an incredible program that they've done so much with. But that's how it started.
I love that. If we want to know what they want, then there's one easy way to find that out.
Exactly.
We're going to go through a quick rapid fire in the last minute or two that we have. Tell me one thing that would surprise people about you who think they know you, but might not know this.
Those that are close to me know, but I am actually what I call an introverted extrovert. So my job requires me to be in conversation constantly with my team at trade shows, at events. In my whole sales career was to be an extrovert, but I always secretly would take a half an hour at every trade show, at every conference, and come back to my room and recharge my battery because I need the introverted side of me needs that battery recharge. And so I think people see me in my day-to-day career and just say, oh my gosh, she's such an extrovert. She's able to just walk in a room and talk to anybody. But the reality is that I'm an introverted extrovert. So I think that surprises a lot of people.
I've heard that from a couple of people. I really love that. Tell me, as you reflect back over your career, what would you today tell 21-year-old Allison at USC, either about how things work out for you or something you wish you knew along the way that might have helped shape your path?
I think I mentioned a little bit ago about how I was so afraid to reveal how young I was. And I think I would tell myself to stop wasting energy on that. I got there for a reason. Be proud of it. Be bold about who I am and how many years I've been in the career in the industry, and I'm already a director of sales, or I'm already doing this. And the intimidation I had of going in and having members of my team who were substantially older than me and trying so hard to prove that I belonged there because of my age, I would say, don't worry about it. Just be you and do your job and stop stressing about that.
I love that. You've given a lot of great advice. When you think about our motto of empowering personal success, is there one thing that you haven't touched on yet, or one thing even you want to elaborate on that you would leave as your final words of wisdom today?
I think I got a lot of them in. I think it's always, my mottos are always do the job before you get the job, be a knower or be a learner and not a knower. Constantly seek to grow and find ways to educate yourself in areas inside and out of your own job scope, and make sure that you are not setting boundaries for yourself that don't actually exist. Me saying I couldn't be a VP of sales because I wanted to be a mom was a boundary that didn't exist. I was just creating it out of my own mind. And I've told a couple of young women, try it first and then decide whether or not you can do it.
Well, Allison, that is something else we have in common. I say all the time, we have enough obstacles. We don't need to be our own obstacles. But as we wrap up today, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your story, for sharing your insights. For those who tuned in today, thank you so much for listening. We hope you'll visit us at itspersonalstories.com to hear more from Allison as well as from other industry leaders. But Allison, thank you so much for all you do for your leadership in the industry and for joining me today.
Thank you for what you're doing in bringing so much growth and information to people to learn from other leaders. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Bye-bye.